Hey all, we live in a culture that's obsessed with being comfortable. It's not how our country started or how it was founded, but it really describes the way we live our lives today. People go through their life, and if anything is difficult or uncomfortable, for the vast majority of people, they look for ways to get around it. We medicate it, we run from it, we avoid the situations altogether, or we just try and get through it as quickly as possible and move on. We don't like discomfort. We don't like being uncomfortable because, well, it's uncomfortable. Well, in this video blog series recently, we've been looking at the life of Jesus, looking particularly at what he did more than what he said, because if we're going to be followers of Jesus and we want to imitate his life, then it makes sense to understand what he did. Well, you cannot go through the life of Jesus without coming to the conclusion that he was comfortable in uncomfortable situations. We read this all the time. He had a conversation, John tells us, with a Samaritan woman at a well that was completely contrary to convention. And when his disciples showed up and wondered what was going on, he was okay with it. Well, there's another story in Luke. And in this story, Jesus is having dinner at a Pharisee's house, which means he was having dinner at a fairly well-to-do establishment. And in Middle Eastern dinners, they didn't eat like we did. They tend to lay down or recline, and they would have their heads towards the table and their feet away from the table. And if it was a visiting dignitary or rabbi, sometimes the people in the community were invited to come and listen to some of the discussions that were happening. And we're told that in the middle of this dinner, a sinful woman, which means this is a woman who had a bad reputation, she showed up at dinner and she began to cry and she began to weep. And then she began to let those tears fall on Jesus' feet. And then she bent over and she wiped his feet with her hair. And if you really picture yourself in this situation, it's hard to imagine how uncomfortable this was. Because if you've ever seen someone really cry, it's messy. It's not just tears leaking out. There's snot, there's all kinds of stuff. And the fact that she is leaning down and wiping his feet with her hair and then kissing his feet and doing this in the middle of a dinner is what makes it uncomfortable. Most of us have been at funerals where someone is weeping or crying or going on, and we get it, we understand it. It's a funeral, someone died. But what if that happened while you were having dinner at a 4-star restaurant with other important people, with all the wait staff watching this go on? Can you picture how uncomfortable that might be? And yet, in the midst of all this, Jesus appears to be completely comfortable. In fact, all his guests are uncomfortable. You got to wonder, like, as this happened, conversation begins to die out. People begin to watch. They're like, what's going on? What's he going to do? And you can feel the tension getting thicker. And Jesus uses it as an opportunity for two things. One, he taught a parable about forgiveness and loving other people to the people's house he was staying at. And he also met this woman at her point of greatest need and set her free. And it makes me wonder about this principle, that not all uncomfortable situations should be avoided. That's our tendency. We'd like to get through them as fast as possible. But I wonder if we began to change our look, our view of the things that happen to us or around us, and began instead, when we face uncomfortable situations, whether that's a difficult conversation or an awkward person or just an uncomfortable general circumstance, instead of seeing it as something to be gotten through as quickly as possible or avoided, we began to think, is there something in here that God is doing where in this uncomfortable situation, I am the person that God has put here to meet a need? I wonder that if we approached it that way, we might take a different approach to uncomfortable situations. We might actually begin to embrace them a little more, being comfortable knowing that Jesus has a plan in the middle of all of it. So, the next time you're faced with an uncomfortable situation, instead of just trying to run from it or get away from it or avoid it altogether, take a pause, embrace it, and see what God might be doing in the midst of all that. Who knows? Their lives might change, and your life might change as a result. Not all uncomfortable situations are meant to be avoided. Till next time.